you're actually going to participate today, we really hope you will, we'd like you to use the chat menu and send your questions through as we go along. The WebEx control panel allows you to actually send your questions to us even as the event is going on. And now the person to send it to is myself, Mark Hadley. So if you send all those questions to Mark Hadley, I'll collect them. And when we move to the point of the discussion where we're going to be taking your questions from the floor, then I'll be able to feed them through to Scott and, of course, Scott McConnell. And speaking of our presenter today, Scott Sanders from Geneva Push, our Executive Director, is actually in charge of the session today. So I think it's a good point for me to hand over to him. Thanks, Scott.
Thanks, Mark. I'm excited about today's session. I've been looking forward to interviewing Scott McConnell about multi-site churches, the when, the how, and the why. As always, we want these planner sessions to be practical. We want to give the opportunity to hear from experienced church planners, experienced experts in the field of whatever topic we're talking about. And we want to give you the opportunity to ask them questions and also give them the opportunity to share the knowledge that they've learned from their experience. As I said, we've got Scott McConnell. Scott McConnell is the author of this book here, Multi-Site Churches. And we've got 2 copies of this book to give away today. 2 copies of this book to give away today. The first book giveaway that we're giving to is Tom Harrick's. He's been given the book today because he's had the most questions prior to the webinar. So Tom, it'd be great if you could let us know your address so we can send this book to you. But I want to introduce Scott McConnell to you. Scott, it's great to have you here.
Great to be with you.
Now, Scott, obviously you're not from Australia. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I'm here from the United States. I've lived in 3 different regions of the United States. Born in Minnesota, grew up in the Philadelphia area, and now I live in the South in Tennessee.
So you're currently living in Nashville?
Nashville, Tennessee, Music City.
And can you tell us a little bit about your family?
Sure. I've got a wife and 2 kids, both teenagers. So the book that I've also written on parenting, I didn't put the parenting advice. I'm still using the advice. I put the research in there, and I've learned a lot from my co-authors on that.
Now, you've got a degree in economics and science from Pennsylvania. What does that mean? What does that mean you're an expert in?
Actually, it's economics is a science, so it's really approaching things from a very scientific method. And I thought I'd be in brand management or something in the marketing field, but God knew better. And first good marketing job he offered, he put in my lap was a job with a really good market research firm. And once I got my feet wet with research, I haven't turned back. God knew what he was doing.
So you're currently at a multi-site church. Can you tell us about that? What does it look like for you on an average Sunday?
Sure. I attend a church here just east of Nashville, Hermitage Hills Baptist Church, and I attend the original campus. So it has a pretty large facility. There's 2 services there, and our lead pastor preaches at both of those services. And then about 10 to probably 12 minutes down the road, we have a second campus that was a church that was about to close, and they offered us their facility and the last few remaining members. And currently we have a campus pastor that preaches 2 services there, much smaller facility, but one of the services is in Spanish, the other in English.
And it was interesting just your language there. You talked about the original campus. Obviously, you know, multi-site, we're using that definition. A multi-site is one church that has 2 or more locations with a shared leadership, budget, vision, and board. How do you talk about the mother church? How do you talk about the church that started things off? What's the language you use around that?
At our church, we use the campus names. So we'll talk about the Hermitage campus, and we'll talk about the Rayon City campus. Mm-hmm. And that way they're equal. It's two different locations we're trying to reach. And so as you move into multi-site, you realize that communication is incredibly important. And people hear things you didn't intend. And so if you use a term like mother church or main campus or hubs and satellites, any of those type of things that are good analogies, that they make sense. Usually size-wise, that's the case. The larger church is the first one.
Yep.
Each of those makes somebody at a satellite campus feel a little inferior, feel a little bit like a stepchild. And so the more you can be using common language that, that's the North Campus, that's the South Campus. That's, terms that make everyone feel like, hey, we're part of one church.
Yep, great. Now, there's obviously, there's a lot on the blogosphere, there's a lot on the internet sort of against multi-site churches. I guess, can you tell us, as a member who goes to a multi-site church in the States, as someone who's, researched and spent a lot of time thinking and writing about it, why multi-site? Why is it, in 2007, was it called a revolution? Why the push for multi-site churches?
You won't find in the multi-site churches book an explanation, a biblical explanation. Really, in my own journey, kind of the way it came up is as I was reading Scripture. Certain Scriptures really kind of pointed me to the fact that that not only does Scripture not say it's wrong, it really leaves an opening that says, a lot of the things that we think can only happen one way, God's a little more creative than that.
Yep.
We see in the first chapter of Mark that is the first time Jesus draws a crowd. He then tells his disciples, let's go to the neighboring villages so I may preach there too. This is why I've come. And so, while we're thinking, wow, this is a great opportunity for Jesus to build a regional church, to be building a bigger sanctuary, Jesus is thinking about other places. We see the same thing with Philip in Acts 8, where just some incredible descriptions of what God's doing in Samaria, with joy coming to that entire city, crowds listening with one mind to what he's saying, which any pastor would love to have that from his congregation. And the very next mention of Philip down in the chapter, it's him being called to go to the desert road. And when he goes there, he meets the Ethiopian, and the gospel goes to a whole new continent.
Yeah.
So when we're thinking, when we think about Philip's situation, again, we're thinking about seating capacity. We're thinking about just what a great thing's going on. Let's call the PR department, our communications team. We're thinking let's go big here, and God wants to do something somewhere else. Same thing in Acts 13, where 5 teachers are introduced in the first verse of the chapter. And, you and I would say, wow, you got a teaching team like that? Let's get the personnel team together and give these guys a nice pay package and keep this together. Or let's start a seminary. We got all these teachers in one place. And yet, again, the very next verse, the Holy Spirit says, set aside for me Paul and Barnabas, and they're going to go, and they go reach Europe. Yeah. And so we see whole continents reached with this concept of, let's not just think about right here. There are other places to reach, and that constant external focus sometimes may mean your church is doing church in 2 locations or more locations.
Yeah, and obviously there's some churches obviously doing it globally around the world, so not just in the region, different states, and then obviously around the world. That's really helpful, Scott. I want to sort of kick into some of our prepared stuff. When does multi-site make sense for a church? I think a lot of people are asking this question. There's obviously a decision-making process that needs to take place. When does multi-site make sense for a church?
If you're a church considering multi-site, you need to look and see if some things are already present. If not, you've got to step back and be fostering those elements in your church before you even consider starting a new site. The first is really basic, but it was really true across churches we interviewed in this research project, is that they really have a focus on the Great Commission. Very much an external purpose and mission to everything they do. Furthermore, they have a culture of multiplication. Like many of you, I grew up in a church, a small church that, yes, I can remember some new people coming to Christ. But I know when I read the parable of the sower in Scripture, I understood what it meant from a planting and a harvest. When I plant a tomato plant, I cheat, I get the one that's already started for me, but when I plant one tomato plant that came from one seed, I know that by the end of the summer, I've gotten dozens and dozens and dozens, probably really hundreds of seeds from that one seed. So I understand that principle in Scripture, but I'd never seen it.
Yep.
And no, you might not be one of those cases where you're seeing, 1,000 to 1 or 100 to 1, but are you seeing addition over and over again? Sometimes we think multiplication is the scary concept, but really when you get down to the math, it's being faithful over and over again, sharing the gospel, and God gives the increase. Really, as a church, you've got to be willing to remove barriers to reach more people, and some of those are just psychological. Are we willing to have a second service here, even at our own location? Are we willing to do without a few things we thought we had to have as a church? Really move some of those, remove some barriers to make some new things happen in a new location. And really, when the opportunity comes up, are you willing to step out on faith? And that means you're preparing ahead of time, but there's going to be a moment where it's a yes or no.
So Scott, then when does multi-site not make sense for a church?
Yeah, definitely multi-site is about multiplying what you have. And so really you've got to look at, is the situation you have right now a situation that's healthy? And or are you really looking for multi-site to be a strategy to try to jumpstart something? And if it's the latter, if you're trying to jumpstart something where your people are not on mission, they're not reaching out to others. If you're really not building community in your church, this isn't the way to jumpstart it. This is something where when you have some momentum, when you have a healthy transformational church in place, that's the time to be looking at, is this a strategy for us to continue this, to let our cup overflow into more places. I give an example in the book where there was a church that was plateaued and really was kind of stuck, and so they said, let's try something new. And so they went to a hotel, they rented a room, and they got some things going, and the music was okay and those kind of things. But, at the end of the day, they had to shut it down, and he had to just admit that, I was trying to make it happen rather than following God's leadership and to follow the things that He's blessing. And so you want to make sure your motives are in the right place. It's not an ego trip to get your face in more places or your name in more places. It's really got to be about the mission and has God blessed you with a healthy enough church that you can reproduce.
So if I can summarize, Scott, really I guess what you're talking about is there needs to be momentum in the church. And so you need to be, I guess, in a stage where there is addition, there is growth, there is this opportunity to see the Great Commission take place in the region or locally, and that's a good time to be pursuing the multi-site strategy. It'd be helpful. We've got a number of pastors, lead pastors of churches of different sizes in the audience today. We've also got a number of campus pastors or potential campus planters as well. Can you help us think through what are the pieces that need to come together to launch a site? So what are the key elements that need to be in place as you think about launching a site?
The first thing comes down to the leadership in the church. As leaders are coming to make that decision, it really needs to be one that everybody's on the same page. And depending on your polity, who's going to be in that room to make that decision. But the worst thing that could happen is for you to have a split decision and to try to move ahead with that site. One of the examples in the book that was the only church that was anonymous, I went to track them down about a year or so after the book came out, and the two campuses had actually become separate churches. And it didn't surprise me because when I went back in their story, they were a church that was thinking about, should we physically move our church? And some people said, well, let's minister in both places. And so you had two camps.
Yep.
One wanting to move and one saying, let's have two sites. And really those two leadership ideas, those two directions to lead persisted, and eventually they went two directions. And I wish them the best in both locations, but again, a lot of hurt feelings can happen in those kind of situations. And so you need to be unanimous about it. Everybody needs to be pulling in the same direction.
And Scott, when you talk about unanimity among leaders, obviously, you as a leader need to be focused on this as a leader of a church. The husband and wife, I guess, the couple leading the church need to be unanimous. Then your eldership, your larger leadership team, your growth leaders, and then really the whole church. I mean, when you talk in that first point about a willingness to remove barriers, that's a willingness that needs to be there amongst the whole church. So we'll come back in later on in the webinar and talk about how you communicate this to the church. But that's helpful to hear about unanimity. What else do we need, Scott?
You definitely need to have a leader at that new campus, one of the failure points for many multi-site churches, these are churches where a lot of good things are happening. So again, they have that momentum. But so as we interviewed them, we really pushed them for some things that went wrong. And for several churches, it was hiring the wrong person or entrusting the wrong person to lead that campus. Yeah. And because that person really needs to be plugged in to the vision of the church, how the church operates, and to really want to be a part of that. Not to create something new, not to do their own thing. And for several churches, my own included, some people that we still have great relationships with, that we wish the best to, but they weren't a great fit. And when you go through multiple leaders, or it's the wrong leader, it can really stall out that new campus in a hurry.
Now, later on, again, you're going to give some insights, and can I encourage you to grab the book as well as some great insights in thinking through what does a campus pastor need, but also how to actually raise up that leadership as well. What about thirdly?
From day one, you're going to be beginning to offer some services there at that church, whether it be a children's ministry, the worship ministry, and maybe you'll be more ambitious than that. But with those, whatever areas of ministry you say are essential from day one, you need a core group that can help lead those. You as the campus pastor or the one getting that started, you can't do it all. And so you need to start to model that from day one of preparation, to have that core group. And many times, if that campus is close enough, there'll be people from that original campus who go with you in this launch. If it's a long distance plant, then it's a lot more like church planting, where you're starting some small groups. You're trying to reach out to people in that community to get that core group started, to get going. The next thing is really to be listening to God for who He wants you to reach out to. Whether that's a neighborhood in your city, whether it's a certain type of people that He's really given you a burden for. But in the same way that missionaries will talk about, when they're sharing what God has called them to do, they're often talking about a place or a people group. And really, if your church doesn't have a burden for a part of town or a people, you're not ready yet. You need to be watching to see what God's doing there.
Yep.
Oftentimes you'll have people already living in that location. If you got people commuting a long way to your church, that could be, an indicator that God may want to do something. But again, you need to make sure that there's a bit of a burden and not just a convenience.
Location comes up lots. Obviously, when I talk to planners, we talk about people, place, location, and then the planter themselves. Have you got any thoughts on how far away from the original campus should a location be? Have you got any thoughts on what happens if you're an urban church and you're actually trying to reach a suburban population? So Australian cities are quite spread out. And so if you've got a city church or a CBD church or a metro church, reaching your suburbs, it can have quite a different look and feel or vibe. Have you got some thoughts on location and how far away from the original campus?
The closer it is to your campus, the more for lack of a better term, cannibalization there'll be, where attendees really have to make a choice. If it's only 3 more minutes to get to the original campus, why would I stop at this new campus that's just fledgling? So oftentimes you're thinking about trying to get at least 10 minutes away, just to have a little bit of that buffer that it's going to appeal to a little different part of the city. Here in the United States, we've got some churches, and they tend to be some of the really big ones that have campuses in a whole nother state, a whole nother, even in another country. And some of that is just mind-boggling to me that we can even be talking that way today. But with travel, with communication that's available, of course we can. And so there's probably not a limit to how far you could get, but probably need to be thinking through more on would that be too close, that it would encourage some people to come back too soon, or to not even try the new campus who would like to try it. Yeah,
great. It's interesting. Australia's population just ticked over to 24 million people overnight. That was most likely a birth, but we're growing at a rate of 1 million people every 3 years. Now I know that's small compared to the United States, 340 million people over there, but we're actually rapidly growing fast, and so multi-site is a real way to reach new geographies and new locations because of this rapid urban growth that's taking place. So fifthly,
well, you mentioned that if it's a different type of area that you'd be reaching with that new campus, you're naturally going to know how to do church the way you do it and to reach the kind of people you're currently reaching. God may very well ask you to go to a different part of town, to cross that main highway, to cross the railroad tracks, as we proverbially say in the United States. When you go to the other side of the tracks, you might have to do ministry in a very different way. And so you need to be prepared for that, and to really add some flexibility into your thinking if the context is different. And so, honestly, we're seeing a lot of multi-site churches really do that. Go into a lower income area as a ministry, knowing it might not pay for itself, maybe ever, and as a site, and be willing to do that anyway. But you need to give that campus pastor some flexibility and really be learning from them about their context so that you can do ministry well in that location.
So what else does a church need to think about?
It's just one item on the list here, but this one really encompasses a lot of things. It's really kind of your systems and structures. So it's really how you do everything you do in your church. There's little kinks. There's little, there's a leak in the pipe somewhere of the structures of your church, and you just may not know it yet. If you start a new site, you'll know it in a hurry. Because those leaky pipes are going to be trying to push through a lot more water a lot faster, and it's going to show up. And so you really have to be honest with yourself about how things are currently operating. You might even need to simplify a few things in your structure so that it's a little easier. But literally, you're going to need to reproduce and implement again everything you currently do. And so especially when it comes down to core discipleship steps, if you're struggling a little bit with reaching new people, with getting them integrated into the life of the church, and actually having multiple options for community when somebody comes into your church, getting them serving. If you look at kind of that discipleship process in your church, number one, if you don't have it laid out, you need to step back and lay it out. But once you look at that, do you have signs of health in each of those areas? If not, that's going to just show up in a real hurry as you get started.
So what you're saying is the multi-site process actually it shouldn't be used as a process to get those systems and structures in place or working better. It'll actually highlight the problems and the issues and give you the opportunity to hopefully make them better.
Absolutely, and there is an element where sometimes you step back and go, wow, we have an opportunity to do some new things here and experiment at this new campus, and you can, but you're raising the risk level when you do that.
Okay.
And so I'd really discourage that, and would really encourage folks to. Sorry about that.
That's all right.
I would really encourage folks to be thinking ahead and making sure that you're as healthy as possible before you go and reproduce. Otherwise, there are definitely examples of reproducing illness.
Yeah, gotcha. And so, what's the final area that a church should be thinking about?
And you'll definitely have folks in your church where this is the first one they think of, but it's the finances. And there are many different ways to do multi-site, and some of them really don't cost that much at all, and others are staggering how expensive they are if you're talking about trying to get facilities and a lot of technology. And so you really need to, again, come up with a plan that fits who your church is. Mm-hmm. And when the finances need to be a part of that equation. Great.
So I guess thinking about these 6 elements, what one missing element creates the most confusion? So if you didn't, what's the area where most churches fall down, I guess, in pursuing a multi-site strategy?
As we listen to multi-site churches and listen to their journey of how they became multi-site and really pushed them for the challenges that they faced. For many of them, and again, these are some great churches. Again, from my small church background, it's mind-boggling the size of some of these churches and how God's blessed them with the way He has. But even at these poster child kind of churches, for many of them, they didn't know who they were. And when they went to reproduce in a new location, it really shone a light on that. And they had to figure it out in a hurry, who they are, so that they can reproduce something that actually fits who they are. If you can imagine, if you've got a number of members who go to that new location, even though they know they're signing up for something new, they're still going to be expecting the same church that they've been a member of, that they've been a part of, that they signed up for. If suddenly we start acting different at that new campus, they're going to say, this isn't my church. Yep. This isn't what I signed up for. And so we really have to know ourselves. And this is an element that even if you're not thinking about going into multi-site, this is something you need to think through for any strategy. If you know who you are, you're going to be able to think through those new strategies and figure out how they could fit in and how you could adapt them to the way your church, God's gifted your church. One of the things as we talked to these leaders is a lot of them use some language that was in probably the first multi-site book, which was about your DNA.
Sure.
And in grade school we learned that DNA is your deoxyribonucleic acid, and we get that it fits in the reproduction piece, but when we actually got down to what do you mean by that, nobody could give us an answer. And so honestly, in the entire, I say this is the most important, but also as we pulled all this learning together in the book, this was the hardest piece to write, because nobody gave it to me and here it is. So really I actually had to invent a word, and it actually isn't even a full word, it's a suffix. A church needs to know their IV. And so the I is your identity. And so, your identity often might even be on your website somewhere, because it's your beliefs, your core beliefs. Hopefully those don't ever change as a church, because they're biblically based. But your vision. And so as a pastor, as in seminary, you probably took a class where they tell you need to write out your vision and where is God calling your church to go. You don't change a vision every year. A vision is something that's there for several years. It changes very slowly over time. And so that's your identity. That's kind of the direction. It's your anchor. That's pretty important. The second piece, though, is your values. And this is something that most churches have never articulated. They've never written these down. And yet, kind of the indicators of some of them are the stories people tell. It's the things that they get excited about. It's the things that create buzz in the church. And so for, some of it gets into style. But if you could articulate the 4 or 5 things that really are what your church values, if those are missing, we didn't do it well. People are disappointed with what happened. So for one church, it might be having fun. I mean, even staff meetings are fun at that church. That's their style. That's their value. They value that. For another church, they have excellence is such a high mark at their church that you think you're walking into Disney World, because every little thing is so thought through and so, and if they try to do an event, they try to do a new service, they try to do something for kids that isn't at that level, everybody's going to look at that and frown, and they're going to say that's not us. So you have to know who you are in order to implement any new strategy.
Yep.
Finally, your expression, that gets down to the real nitty-gritty details of what do you call things, when do you do them, how do you function. And so in the same way, this little suffix "iv," the definition is how is something inclined to act. And so if something's expensive, that means it's inclined to cost a lot.
Yep.
If a rugby player is elusive, they're going to be really hard to track down and pull down when they're on the run. So, how is your church inclined to act? What are people expecting?
Yep.
And yes, we might want to keep them a little on their toes, but at the same time, we have to understand what that is. And so when you know who you are, you can start to say, how are we going to do that in a new place?
Now, Scott, you make the point that new sites must prioritise and invest in the programs and the activities that matter most, and not try to offer everything. So, there's a sense in you've started to work out who you are, you've started to work out your if. The answer and the solution is not just to recreate something exactly the same. It's actually think about the context and work out, what it is that you're going to, do differently or not do in this context and in this location. Is that right?
Yeah. There are a lot of things your church does that really isn't the core. And so part of this is thinking through those priorities that, at your first campus, your original campus, you may not get rid of those extra things, at least not right now, but still think through what's the core. And so then when you go to start at the new site, that's what you'd want to be starting. And maybe later you'll add one of those other things, but maybe later you're adding something unique to that new site that will serve the people in that community or meet a need that they have that you don't have at that original campus. So have some flexibility in there, but also know kind of what are those priority things that, that's part of who we are, that's part of kind of an essential function of our church.
Great. And then you talk about applying this understanding to key decisions. So if you can speak briefly to this and then...
Yeah. So really, as you're building kind of a multi-site strategy for your church, take who you are and apply it to, well, how much freedom are we going to give that campus pastor? How much can they adapt to be contextual? Same thing with deciding who oversees multi-site. If your lead pastor is involved in everything right now, people would see it kind of odd. That would send a message if that lead pastor is not involved in this new site. And the same way, if your lead pastor is pretty hands-off and he delegates to other staff members or key volunteers, then it would probably be very appropriate for one of those other seniors, staff, or really key volunteers to be in charge of that new site. One of the first ones people often want to talk about is how are the sermons going to be delivered in that new site? Is it by video or if it's live, who's doing it? Are you rotating pastors between your campuses? Those are all options. There's a lot of churches doing it a lot of different ways. So think through who are you and let that drive which of those choices you actually make for your church.
Now I'm going to put a pin in that. I'm going to put a pin in that discussion on the videos because we've got a lot of questions already, and it's great. Keep sending those questions through. They're really quite helpful to keep getting those questions. So if you can send them through to Mark Hadley, and then Mark Hadley will collate those. We've got another book giveaway. Can I just remind Tom Harricks, Tom, if you can send through your details. you won the first book. I think you came in a little bit late. You won the first book because you asked so many questions prior to the multi-site coming in. Now, the first person who gets in to respond to this answer, Scott's just spoken of the 6 pieces that need to come together to launch a site. If the first person can respond in their chat panel about the greatest challenge they're facing, they'll win a book. So have a think about that. Of those 6 pieces that Scott's just spoken about, if you could just share briefly what challenge you're facing the most, the first person to send those through will receive a book. Okay, Scott, we're going to keep going, and hopefully people will send their answers through. What does leadership look like? And if we can move through this pretty quickly, because we've got a lot of questions that I want to get into. So, what does leadership look like in a multi-site church?
Definitely, what the campus pastor is a key person here, and typically a pastor, any pastor, has 3 roles: a teacher, a shepherd, and a leader. Typically, for a campus pastor, they're not doing the teaching. Typically, they're really focusing on the shepherding of that flock at that new campus, and they're an extension. They're a leader for the campus, an extension of the church's leadership. Now, my own church is an exception. We have a campus pastor who teaches each week at the second site. There are definitely other churches that do that, or they might rotate those teachers. But even then, that campus pastor is preparing a sermon to match up with the lead pastor's sermon. So he's preaching on the same sermon. The theme is the same, so that the worship guide can have the same logo on it for the month. And so he's definitely following, even though he is doing some firsthand teaching.
Yep.
Let's go ahead and show the flow diagram, because hopefully we want leadership to be flowing through this campus, and so hopefully your pastor or your elders are really listening to God's leadership for the church. And then, they're going to be directly responsible for some of the ministries there at that original campus, but they also need to be investing in the campus pastor. And so they're having to think 2 directions. The campus pastor, therefore, is really understanding the context, and they've got to be a leader of understanding the context for that site and leading the things that happen. On a given Sunday morning, everything that happens at that site, the campus pastor needs to own that, but he also needs to have empowered some core leaders to own that as well.
Mm-hmm.
Really what you begin to see here, and as we move on, is kind of a matrixed organization, and that's a business term. But if you think of the business world for a minute, you know who your boss is, and so you answer to them. They're giving you work. There are things that you need to do because they tell you to do it. So in a church setting, most leaders know who they answer to at a single site. If I'm a volunteer and I teach every week a life group of preteens, older children, and so I know who the children's minister is at my church. That's the next level up for me. I know who that is. What happens in multi-site is it gets a little more complicated, because not only is there the children's person there at your camp there, but there's also a campus pastor. And how does that fit in? And so you start to get into I need to be listening to what's going on within my campus, but I also need to be understanding what's going on within the ministry I serve in. And when we talk about communication in a multi-site church, we need to be very forthright, really planning ahead and having these discussions, knowing we're going to have to keep having these discussions about how we work together. So how a children's ministry is working at each of the campuses, so that each person knows what they need to do on a given Sunday or at an event, but they understand how it fits into the bigger picture. And, this could come down to little decisions like, what curriculum are you using for that Bible study?
Yep.
Is that going to be the same across every campus? And so that decision's coming from, the children's ministry leader for the whole church? Or is that coming from my campus, where we're saying, no, we need to do something different here because of our context? And so you need to constantly be talking through those. In the business world, there's the person you report to, but then you'll network with, oftentimes it'll be called a community of practice, where you're working across. If you're in the finance area, you're going to be working with the finance people part of the time, but then you're also going to go to some matrix meetings where you're sitting down with the marketing people, with the engineers, and you're making some decisions together. Both of those are equally important. You need to be growing in your skills in finance, but you also need to be growing in your skills of making decisions across the organization.
Now, Scott, I've kind of just tried to draw that on the screen. Is the complexity there mainly for the campus pastor and then the original campus or the site leaders who oversee, say, a ministry area? Is there that level of complexity and needing to network for the person who's doing the youth ministry, on the ground with the Year 9 students or the middle school students? Where does the complexity come in?
Really, anybody in a leadership role anywhere in the church, volunteer or staff, is going to feel it.
Yep.
The campus pastor is going to feel it the most because they're going to hear the confusion from those beneath them, as well as their own confusion of, is this my own call, or is this something that somebody, the lead pastor is deciding, or is this something that I'll use this broad term, central services, is kind of a generic term. Most churches don't use that term, but it does describe, things like, technology and accounting and those kind of things that you're sharing across campuses. Who's deciding those things? And so constantly leaders are in the rub of, is this my call or not? And it's kind of like in basketball, who am I looking to for this pass? Or soccer, you don't know who's the ball coming from, and so you just have to really communicate a lot about, for these kind of decisions, this is who's going to be giving you the ball. For these kind of decisions, this is who's going to give it to you.
Excellent. Scott, I just want to announce the winner of the book, Dan Godden. So Dan Godden, if you can send through your details. You were the first to respond, I think, and your main challenge was getting our church to trust the new leader and to trust that the new site will share Salt Church DNA or whatever other analogy that you want to come up with. Thanks for sending through your questions. Keep them coming through. We're going to be going to them in a moment. I've just got one last prepared question for Scott. How do you communicate multi-site effectively? So if you just give us some of the key tips that you've seen.
This really has to come from the heart of the leader and be present, long before you actually say we're going to go to multi-site. And I love this quote from David Parker, probably my favorite one in the entire book, where he's just honest, and he says the harder thing for us to communicate vision-wise is that we're really a church that's focused on others. Mm-hmm. So you don't want your identity, at some point your identity is, yes, we're a multi-site church. But, really what you want is your identity to be that we're reaching out to others.
Yep.
We're externally focused. And if that's your identity, then strategy-wise, if multi-site is something God leads you to, your people will say, wow, that makes sense. Mm-hmm. That's part of who we are. And, it may still take some time for them to fully understand it, to know all the implications of it. And so building that trust can take some time. But really, if you've proven over time that this is the thing you value as a leader, this is the thing you're really trying to equip the congregation, the members, to be doing on a regular basis, then it's going to flow. It's going to be really something that they see as natural.
Yep.
The other piece to this is, as you start to communicate, we're going to do something in a new place, and you start to say, hey, logically, some of you, this makes sense for you to be a part of this new work. You still are bringing them back to that mission, that we're not going there just so you have a shorter drive to come to church. We're not going there for any convenience reasons, but really, this is an opportunity for you to invite people and not ask them to drive 20 minutes to come to our current location. Yep. And so when those people that you're inviting to be a part of that new work really see it as outreach, see it as a way to become even more active themselves, then that's the excitement you want to be creating.
Your kind of second point is really saying the same thing, just shifting to, we don't have a group of people here, we've actually got a group of people here who can be on mission, and we're going to make it easier. And, which is just your first point, we want to be thinking about mission. So what I'm hearing is mission. Finally.
We see a lot of multi-site churches when they think about that new location that God's put on their hearts is to go and just start serving there, and to really be understanding the needs in that community. And so as you begin to do that, then when you go to shortly thereafter, when it's time to invite people to come to what you're doing, it's more than just a meeting. It's more than just a worship service. This is really a functioning body that they're coming to step into. And even if they're a non-believer and they don't fully understand all of that, again, Scripture tells us they'll know we are Christians by our love. And when they see that love in action, more and more folks will understand that and be curious enough to come along.
You talk about the importance as well of, I guess, in your book of word of mouth, of advertising, relational activities, and actually having a visible presence in the community as well. So, tell us a bit about that. That communication responsibility, yes, starts with the leadership, but really your goal is word of mouth. Your goal is for in the same way you're equipping the saints to do good works, you're equipping the saints to share the gospel. You're also equipping them to be the communications mechanism. And so when you start to see people catching that, when you hear them correctly articulate the vision of the church, when you hear them, sharing with others, then if you do any advertising or you do some of these other things, that's just extra. If that word of mouth, some of that human interaction is not occurring, then mailers or advertising, and those kind of things aren't going to be too productive. Now, Scott, I'm going to give you a bit of a break. A bit of a break. I just want to again remind people this is a cracker book. I'm one of those people who learn by reading and listening to the stories of others. So you might not agree with everything in here. It might not fit your context. But what I found helpful just reading through this book was the stories in it actually prompt you to think about your own location and reflect on your own place. The other thing I encourage you to do is Geneva Push is a network where we are a network in the sense that it's a bunch of people who are all committed to seeing hundreds of new churches evangelised into existence. So I reckon it's always great, go down the road, see what other people are doing, hear their story, ask them questions to work out how you potentially should, think through that multi-site strategy. As I said, there's been a number of questions coming through, and that's really good. I'm going to go to the first question, which was from Ray Galea. And it was a question about the distance between the sites and the hub or the original church. I feel like we've answered that question. Do you have anything further to say on that one, Scott?
The one other thing is the further the distance, the more you've got to think through that communication between that campus pastor and the lead pastor, the campus pastor, and any staff at the original campus. Because if it's not an easy for him to pop into staff meetings and those kind of things, then you're going to need to think about those logistics as well. Yeah.
There's actually a question that came through from Dan Godden about that in terms of the staffing. How do multi-site staff teams work well in spread-out situations? Dan Godden asked. Dan's a pastor from Wollongong, a city that's kind of long and thin because it's got mountains and coast. So how does multi-site staff teams work when you're spread out?
I think more and more in our technological world, we have got a lot of options. So in the same way we're interacting today, I'm not getting to see everybody's face, but I can see Scott's face, and that alone sometimes can raise the trust level just among staff. And so, regular communication each and every week is an important part of that. And you'll have to do that a little bit style-wise. You know, if somebody doesn't like email at all, then, you know, you need to bring them along, but, you know, maybe you don't depend on that as much as you would if everybody loves email. You know, we see that, you know, even among, you know, pastor to campus pastors.
Yep.
You know, some of the best churches were churches where that senior pastor took the time to spend with them, even if one of them was having to come in remotely each week. There's something to really articulating things, letting people speak back to you what they've heard, so that you know communication has occurred, that you're on the same page. Not to mention the brainstorming and the ideas that can be generated as well.
We've got another question from Ray. Shared video link or local pastor preaching. What are the pros and cons? How often, if at all, does the lead pastor need to preach at a site? That question comes from Ray Galea.
Yeah. You know, the more I see examples of multi-site, the more examples there are. So there's a lot of ways to do this. And so, you know, video is more complicated. You know, you've got to get it recorded. It's got to be at least a clear communication copy of what the lead pastor was presenting, and you have to get it there. And so, you know, if you don't have satellite capabilities, which many multi-sites don't have that, so they have to think through, when are we recording this? Is it the week before? Is it a Saturday service? Is it the pastor in his study? Yeah. Recording it? And so, you know, there's a lot of logistics there that you've got to think through. At the same time, you know, one of the churches in a rural area that we mentioned in the book, you know, he really saw, as he looked around, that one of the things in rural areas that tends to be lacking is good communicators.
Yep.
And so he said, you know, that's what I'm going to try to solve here. I'm not going to try to grow really huge churches because that's not possible in some of these locations.
Yeah.
And so he said, we're going to just intentionally start new locations, you know, before we even reach the hundreds level. And so video allows you to take a good communicator, and sometimes a great communicator, and use that in the new location. And so, you know, especially if God has not raised up another leader that has teaching capabilities, that can definitely meet some needs there. But if you know that lead pastor does need to be seen. You know, if I'm just giving advice on my own, I would say at least quarterly. Yeah. That lead pastor needs to be present physically for that campus to see them and to understand the connection. Sometimes, if logistics allow, you know, sometimes churches can do a joint service. There's some place where they can meet, and one of them travels to that location, or sometimes they're, you know, renting a location that they all can go to that week. But whether that lead pastor is coming to your site, or whether it's one of those joint services, you know, I would think at least quarterly so that people keep that connection.
So what you talk about there is actually the opportunity to get together the different sites in one place. You know, it needs to be thought about. How often do you do that? I know some churches that have done that with, you know, a big weekend away where everyone gathers together. Others, as you say, have done it, you know, quarterly if a site's been available. Can you? A few people have asked, you know, how do you prepare a church? So Matt Malcolm asks, you know, how do you prepare a church for video? You know, what's the how of actually, you know, getting ready to do it this way?
The two things we learned from churches that started this. One is if that new location has video from the very beginning, then the new people you invite to that campus, they don't know any different. And so they're not going to notice. So the real question is, how about your core group? The core group that you're sending out to help get this campus started, if you don't do any video, any projection of the pastor as they're teaching right now, then it will seem really odd to see the pastor on a screen.
Yep.
And again, some of them are going to be so committed that they're there. They're going to make that work. They're not going to notice the difference. But really, just that simple, running a video camera feed and having that pastor image, whether it's one or whether it's two, one on each side, or however your room might allow it.
Yep.
It might seem like a little vain, but really, there's a lot of churches who do it that only have one site.
Yep.
And simply by doing that, people in the room start to get used to looking at that screen half the time. And if it's bigger than what they can see with their eye, they're in the back of the room or something, or if that's zoomed in a little bit, they find themselves looking at that screen a lot while the pastor's teaching. And that's really a way to prepare people that when you go to that new site, that's all you're going to see is that screen. Many of us have done Bible studies where there's a video teacher. And, if the quality is good, it's met the need. And so really you've got to be thinking about, preparing folks and having those screens within your original campus is probably the best way to do that.
Right, that's really helpful. I mean, your church has actually gone for the live preaching option, which, theologically is where a lot of pastors are driven. You teach through preaching. So it's interesting, again, you say there's lots of variations. You need to think about who you are, and then think about the logistics and prepare people for it if they're not used to that as well. Interesting. We've got a few more questions coming up around that as well. I guess one of the key questions around staff changes. We'll put some of these things up, but one of the questions that's popped up a few times is what are the characteristics that you look for in a campus pastor? So, what are the key things that you would say to a multi-site leader as they're trying to find someone, as they're trying to raise a leader up?
Definitely one of the characteristics is going to look a lot like what you're looking for in a church planter, and that is somebody who's evangelistic.
Yep.
They've got to be out there doing it, living it, and modeling, sharing their faith. And so, in that way, that leader is going to look a lot like a church planter. A second way that they're going to look a lot like a church planter is they're somebody who can they can lead, and by that I mean that they have some charisma. They can draw people in, and they also have enough of that leadership presence that when they send people out, people really want to do that task. They really want to go do what they've sent them to do, and so they have to have that leadership component. Yep. The way that they have to be different though than a church planter is that they're under someone else's leadership. Yep. And they really need to respect that. That needs to be their heart. And so in many respects, I think of them as an implementer rather than a creator. Mm-hmm. Now, they still need to be creative because they've got to be flexible. There's going to be things that go wrong, and they've got to come up with a creative solution in a hurry. So all those kind of things are helpful, but they're not reinventing the wheel. Yep. This church already has an idea what works. This church already has a mission that God has given them, and people God has brought with gifts, and so they have to fit within that. And so you're looking for somebody who really buys into that vision. Oftentimes when that campus pastor comes up from within, then as the elders or as the lead pastor, you're going to have that confidence that they're on the same page. Yep. At the same time, there are multi-site churches that hire from the outside when it comes to a campus pastor. You just need to take the time to make sure that they really understand who you are, and possibly have them come alongside you in another staff capacity or key volunteer capacity for a while, so that for sure they're in line with where you're headed.
Yeah, we've got one more question. Time for one more question. You've been part of a number of launch teams, or you've been part of two launch teams. You're preparing another launch for a multi-site. Can you just really briefly give us some key things? Scott Curtis from Hunter Bible Church is about to launch a site, and so he's really keen to hear, what are some of the key things to think about as you prepare the launch team for that site? What are 2 or 3 things that you'd encourage him to think about?
really the best examples that I've seen and been a part of is really taking the time for that core team to really build a love for each other, and for them to be praying and planning together, before a lot of action happens that anybody sees, and because they're going to go through a lot of trials, and as the leaders, they're going to take the heat for what doesn't go well, and the more they're trusting each other and that they're trusting God for what's happening, the better.
Yep.
So that would be the biggest thing I would say in that process would be really that team coming together on the front end.
Mm-hmm. One final question. Can you recommend any other books? Can you recommend any other books that would be helpful?
There's a couple. Obviously, I wasn't the first book on multi-site. So Multi-Site Revolution kind of talks about how the whole movement got started. It will talk about a lot of what's involved in multi-site. So definitely that's an important book when you're trying to get up to speed on multi-site. Jim Tomberlin is somebody who does a lot of consulting with multi-site churches here in the States. I don't recall the name of his most recent book, but he's definitely somebody I trust a lot. And so, his advice and kind of what he's recorded is an important piece. And I'm picturing the book in my office on localities, and that might have been his book as well. And so, one of the keys actually in preparation for a launch is making sure that launch team has gotten a glimpse of what it might look like. And so through books, but also through, can you go visit somebody else's campus? Can you go visit another church that might be in a similar kind of part of town? Any of those kind of experiences are definitely going to be helping somebody come along and get ready for what you're warming them up for.
Well, Scott, it's been excellent talking with you this morning. We've got a number of questions that haven't been able to be answered, and if possible, I might email them to you and and get you to give us a brief response. But again, can I encourage you? The book is really helpful, and really, I just want to thank you for the time that you've spent this morning, giving us an insight into multi-site churches.
It's been a pleasure to be with you this morning.
I'm going to hand it over to Mark.
And let me add my thanks, too, for being part of the show today. It's actually been brilliant. And also for everyone who's participated. We've had a wonderful time with the questions coming through. Please excuse my peek behind the curtain to those who saw a couple of the wrong messages sent through. But that said, also special thanks to those people who were listening so attentively they walked away with a book. It's something we hope to be looking forward to doing more of in the future. And speaking of things we'll be hoping to do more of in the future, we'd also like to thank our sponsor, EA Insurance, that makes this entire stream of events through the year, the planted sessions possible. Again, if you're looking for something to do with insurance and you're not particularly sure about how to approach the topic, you just know you need to have some, well then straight away you can actually get onto EA and we'll be able to help you do that if you can't contact them directly, and they'll be able to help you with all your insurance need to do with church planning. Before you go, don't forget that the next planner session that's coming up on the 8th of March is in fact particularly important for church planners in Australia. The results are in what makes Australian church plans work. This is the result of a great deal of study done by Dr. Ed Stetzer, a missiologist at Lifeway Research, and Scott McConnell will be back again to help us a bit with that too. All of the information that helps us understand what exactly is working of the many different things that you might do. Statistically speaking, what sort of approaches to creating gaps in your community to be able to contact people and make real impressions on lives. What's actually working? We'll come to our next planner session and we'll share you the statistics. And I guess that takes us to the end of today. We'd like to thank you and let you know that this event has been recorded and will be on our website as we go into the year. Thanks very much.